Welcome back, class. This is your Catia mentor, and today we're going to learn how to split solids using surfaces. All right, so let's say we're working on a fuselage. We're probably working on a firewall or a frame or a bulkhead on the fuselage. Here's something I found online. So let's say we're working on the frames. So here we have a structural frame. And you can see this is a machine part. Frames can be made out of sheet metal, aluminum formed sheet metal, or it can be made out of composites like carbon fiber, etc. We're going to go with something that's machined and learn how to split a solid with surfaces. Alright, so let's go ahead and model something real quick. I'm going to be jumping between generative wireframe and surface and part design. So let's create some wireframe and surfaces first. Okay, so part body, that's where you want your solids. So we're going to create a geometric set to insert our wireframe and surfaces. Make sure it's underlined, right click define. It's underlined, letting us know that anything that we create will fall into the geoset. And when we're ready to create solids, we'll define the part body. Alright, so let's create something very simple. I'm going to keep the shapes very simple, very basic. I'm going to create an ellipse to represent the location of that frame we're going to model up. And let's model up another section towards the tail section of the aircraft. And we're going to make this circular in shape. The first one is elliptical. Next one I'll make it circular. Alright, let me give this some color. I'm going to take sketch 1, hold on to the control key, pick sketch 2, right click properties, and I'm going to give it some color. I'll make it cyan. Actually, let me give it some thickness. Alright, so now we're going to create our surface. So we'll use multi-section surface. Make sure the arrows are pointing in the same direction. In this case, they're both going counterclockwise. Okay, hit OK. There's our surface. Alright, so I'm going to give this some color. I'm going to right click on the geoset, right click properties. I'll make it a tan color for surfaces in the geoset. There it is. Okay, so let's say we're ready to start creating solids. So I'm going to go to part body, but before I do, let me put a plane where the frame goes. So let me create another plane. And I'm just randomly picking numbers. Okay, so let's say the frame goes at this location, at that station. Alright, so now we're going to go over to part body, right click define, and we're ready to create a solid. So let's go over to Part Design app. We're going to create a sketch and turn it into a solid. Let's go to Essentials, and on that new plane, actually let me go ahead and I'll leave it the same color for now. I was going to add more color to it. I'll just leave it the same color, or the default color. And I'm going to create a sketch, and I'm just going to create a block. Instead of trying to get the exact dimensions or something close to the radius of the ellipse, I'm going to just go further out, because you never know if that surface is going to change. So it's okay if you go further out. You're going to chop away at it anyway. Okay, so let's go ahead and exit. And I'm going to right click on the part body, define it, so anything I create will fall into the part body. And I'm going to create a pad of this rectangular sketch. And I'm just going to go with 1 inch. And OK. And there's our solid. Actually, I'm going to go further out. I'm going to exaggerate and go 2 inches. And all right. All right, so let's say we also want an opening. So we're not going exactly like the picture. You can see that the frame ends here at the lower end, same on the opposite side, and then it's tied together. We're just going to make one complete frame. All right, so we can start by chopping away at this solid with the surface. Keep in mind that split in surfacing is not the same as split in part design. So split in part design is different than the split in wireframe and surface. If you want to split wires, splines, lines, surfaces, you do it in the generative wireframe and surface app. If you want to split a solid, you need to do it here in part design, and here is split. So we're going to split a solid. We're going to split it with the surface. Arrows are pointing inward, meaning it's going to keep the inside portion. If you wanted to keep the outside, right, we would flip it outward. We're going to flip it inward. We want to keep the inside part. Okay, so there's the beginning of our frame. Let me temporarily hide the geoset. I actually want to see the edges, so let me go to View, View Modes. I do want to see the edges and any fillet tangencies. There it is. Okay. All right. Now let's say we have to machine the inside to make it lightweight. So one of the things you're always fighting is gravity when it comes to aircraft. And you try and machine as much material as you can while it's still maintaining its structural integrity. Okay, so we also have flanges that made with the skin of the fuselage. All right, so let's say we're going to machine off and keep maybe a 1/2 inch thickness on this frame on the inside, and we'll leave the flange at 2 inches, but we're going to remove the inside so it has a thickness of only 1/2 inch. But before I do, I'm going to also create an opening. So let's go ahead and create another surface on the inside. All right, so let me go back to GeoSet. I'm going to right click define, and I'm going to go back to wireframe and surface app. And it doesn't matter which plane I created. I'm going to create a surface that's going to cut through this solid. I'll just create it on our station plane. Create a sketch. And I'm going to make a smaller ellipse. So I'm going to create a new surface off of this ellipse. I'm going to extrude. I'm going to go in both directions. There we see the surface. It's always to have more than what you need, just in case the solid shifts. You always want to make sure you have more than enough surface just in case the solid shifts. And then later on it doesn't want to split because it falls out of the envelope of the surface. I'll just keep it at 10 in both directions. Okay, another thing I could have done instead of creating this new surface, I can just offset the existing OML surface or IML surface of the skin. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to part body. I'm going to right click define, go back to part design. Okay, so now I'm going to create an opening on the solid. We're going to use split again, just like we did earlier. Going to essentials. Let's go ahead and split. Split with this inside surface. And we want to keep the outside portion outside the surface. We don't want the inside. So the arrows are pointing in the right direction. And okay, and there's the opening. All right, so let's say we're ready to machine off some of this area here that's not needed. We're trying to make it as lightweight as possible. All right, so let's say our flange on the solid, we're going to create a flange or keep a flange on the outside where it mates up with the skin, and then we'll also create a flange here on the inside. We're not going to create it, we're actually going to pretty much make a pocket, leaving us with two flanges. But we're not going to use the pocket command. Okay, we're not going to use the pocket command, or else we're not going to have a consistent thickness on the flange, so we have to do it a different way. The old school way of doing this, they would use Boolean operations. They would use a solid to subtract from a solid. That's an old school way of modeling before we had pocket command and hole command. Booleans are great, but I prefer to split a solid with the surface instead of using another solid to remove from it. 90% of the time I prefer to split with the surface. Sometimes it is better to use booleans, and I'll show that in a separate video of when to use booleans versus splitting with the surface. All right, so you can see that our plane, let me go ahead and change the color of the plane. Okay, so you can see that the plane is on the back side or aft side of the solid. You can see that. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new plane offset 1/2 inch because we're going to leave the inside, the web area of the frame at a 1/2 inch thickness. Currently the solid is 2 inches thick. Okay, so I'm going to create a new plane, offset it from our station plane, And I'm going to offset it by 0.5, the thickness of our web. And let me give it its own color. I'll make it yellow. Okay, so we're going to sketch on that yellow plane. Okay, so I'm going to go to the yellow plane, which is on the forward side of our cyan station plane. I'm going to sketch on that yellow plane. Doesn't matter what shape your sketch is, as long as it's beyond the IML surface, the larger ellipse. So I'm just going to draw a circle. And go beyond the ellipse. It's always better to have excess when it comes to surfacing. Okay, exit. And I'm going to use the fill command. So I forgot I was supposed to move to geoset. We're creating wireframe and surfaces. So I have my sketch of my circle in the wrong section. I have it in part body when it should be in geoset. So I'm going to just right click, cut, and paste it into our geometric set. And there it is. It did relabel it from sketch 5 to sketch 6, but that's okay. Now, typically you do want to label your geometry, but to save time I'm going to just give it its default name, or leave it with this default name. Alright, so let me right click, geoset. So anything new we create falls into the geoset. Same thing with the plane. That plane was supposed to be in the geoset, so let me right click, cut, and paste it into the geoset. Paste. Sketch 6 lost its plane, its support. So let me go back and tell it that the yellow plane is its support. Right click. Change sketch support. We're not going to change it, we're actually going to relink it. There it is. And OK, and there it is. Alright, so now we're going to create a surface. Go to Generative Wireframe and Surface app. And we're going to use the fill command to fill that circle. And there it is. I'm going to change the color of our IML surface of the fuselage. Give it a different color than the other surfaces. I'll go with a bluish color. Okay, there it is. Alright, so again, this surface is 1/2 inch forward from our station cyan plane. As you can see, here's our circular surface, which is 1/2 inch from the backside of the solid. Okay, so let's say that for the flanges, let's just keep it at 1/2 inch. Typically it's not the same thickness. Typically a stress analyst will give you the thickness of the flanges and the thickness of the web. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to also offset the IML surface inward by 1/2 inch. So let's say the stress analyst tells you, hey, we're going to make these flanges 1/2 inch thick also, just like the web. So we're going to take this surface and offset it by 1/2 inch. We're going to offset it inward. Notice the arrow is pointing in the right direction, inward. And OK. And there's our new surface on the inside. Okay, so that'll give us the thickness of our flanges. Okay, so 1/2 inch offset. And we're going to do the same thing with the inside. Let me change the color of this surface, this extrude. I'll make it a greenish color. Okay, so we're going to do the exact same thing except we're going to offset outward. Okay, so let's offset this surface 1/2 inch outward to create the flange on the inside. And OK. So we can zoom in. Okay, so we'll have a flange in the inside and a flange on the outside. And this web will be 1/2 inch thick, just like the flanges. Okay, so now we need to combine the surfaces that we just created, the brown surfaces. Okay, before I do that, I'm going to hide the solid. Let me hide the solid. Right click hide. So I don't want to click on the wrong thing. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to keep this inside portion of the circular surface. We want this inside portion. We want this portion, not the back side. So we want this forward side surface and this forward side surface. We don't want the back side. Let me temporarily hide this IML surface. So once again, we don't want this back side. Nor this back side. Okay, we want to keep the forward side. Alright, so we're going to use a tool called trim. Trim is actually split and join combined into one command. So it's going to split the surface or surfaces. It's going to remove any excess and then it's going to join them into one. So that's what trim is. Okay, so you got to pick things in the right order and also select the correct portion of the surface you want to keep. Okay, so I'm going to go to trim and I'm going to select the inside or the circular surface between the two flanges, right? So I'm going to pick the inside portion between the two flanges. Click. And then I'm going to pick our brown surface. So this is the thickness, 1/2 inch of the inside flange. So I'm going to pick this side and not the back side. So here's the forward side. Click. And then we're going to do the same thing for our 1/2 inch thickness for the outside flange. So we don't want the back side, we want to keep the forward side. And click. So notice it's removing the excess and then joining the leftover pieces. And hit OK. Let me hide this green surface just to show you the result. Okay, so here we have the circular portion of the surface. Here we have our flange thickness of 1/2 inch for the outer flange, and then we have the 1/2 inch thickness for the inner flange. Okay, so we're going to use this to split from the solid. Okay, let me give this its own color. Right click properties. And let me use I'll use a purple color. Okay. Okay, so we're going to use this purple surface. Let me go ahead and turn on some lights. It's a little dark. So I'm going to go to the View tab. Go to Ambience and Camera. Go to Override. So we're overriding the current settings. Default settings, and we're going to add a second light source. So we have 2 light sources. We can also increase the intensity. And the direction of the lighting. And we can close that off. Alright, so here's our surface that we're going to use to split the solid with. Okay, so let's go back and show the solid. Right click show. So there's our solid, and we're going to use the purple join surfaces to split and remove this portion of the solid, and it's going to leave us flanges on the outside, flanges on the inside, and the web will be 1/2 inch thick instead of 2 inches. So currently the solid is a constant 2-inch, has a 2-inch constant thickness. All right, so let's go ahead and split the solid. So we're going to go back to part body, right click define. So anytime we're working with creating solids or removing from a solid, subtracting from a solid, we want to do it in part body, and we need to go over to part design. All right, so now we're going to split that solid with our purple surfaces. Okay, so let's go to split. Actually, one thing I did forget to do, and I'll come back and do it. So I'm going to split with our purple join surfaces, and OK. And let me go ahead and hide the geoset. And I don't see the flanges. Let me go back. I think I misclicked. Let me delete the split. Oh, it was on the opposite side. My mistake. Let me show it again. Actually, it was in the correct side. Wondering if I misclicked when I trimmed. So let's do it again. Okay, let's do it again. Let's trim the solid. Okay, make sure the part body is defined. We're going to split with our purple. And we're going to keep the inside portion. So maybe the arrows were pointing in the wrong direction. And OK. Actually, I do have it pointing in the wrong direction. So the split, I chose the wrong side. Let me double click on the split. Flip the arrows. I want to keep the opposite side. So that's the reason I did it incorrectly the first time and the second time around. That's all right. Let's fix this. So now the arrowheads are pointing in the right direction, and OK. Now we can hide the geoset. And now we have the split solid. And it's sticking on the color of the geoset or surfaces that it was used to split. That's why it's brown on the inside, or tan. That's the color of the geoset. Okay, so one thing I wanted to do was go back. Let's go back. I'm going to hide the part body. Go to the geoset. One thing I could have done, and I prefer to do it at the surface level, is add fillets. So let's say we wanted to add some fillets to the surface. So let me go back to define geoset. Go into wireframe and surface. And I'm going to create fillets. Edge fillets. Okay, and I'm going to go with a fillet of, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch, 0.125, so 1 divided by 8, 1/8 of an inch, and then click away, and it'll convert it to a decimal, 0.125, and OK. And now we have our fillets. All right, so I'm going to go back to the solid. And I'm going to change my split to split it with the surface with the fillets, right? Okay, so the fillets we just created, we're going to use the filleted surface to change our split. Okay, so instead of our trim that we did at first, we're now going to do it with the trim with the fillets. And the arrowheads are pointing in the wrong direction. Flip it and okay. Now let's hide our geoset. And there it is. Now it does include fillets, as you can see. All right, so here we have our solid with splits. Now let's say you turn this over to the stress analyst and they come back and say, hey, we need to make this lighter, right? So upper management says the aircraft is too heavy. Go back and analyze and see where we can remove material, make the aircraft lighter. So let's say the stress analyst tells us, you know what, we're going to make this even thinner, but only in the lower portion. Let's say the top portion, we want to keep it at 1/2 inch thickness. But they tell you, hey, we're going to make the lower portion of the web and the flanges, we're going to make it, instead of 1/2 inch, we're going to make it 3/8 of an inch, 0.375 inches. Okay, so we're going to thin this out even more. All right, so we're going to first create a rectangular surface going across, and we'll start thinning out the web and the flanges from here to here. And we're just going to use our existing plane, which is the XY plane. All right, so let's go ahead and create another surface. So let's go to Geoset. It's defined. When you define it, it turns on to the show. All right, so let's go in and create another surface. Let me temporarily hide the solid. So on the XY plane, we're going to create another sketch. And we're going to create a rectangle. It's okay if you overextend. Exit. And we're going to use the fill command to fill that rectangle. Okay, so we're going to take our existing joined surfaces and now we're going to offset outward 1/8 of an inch. So how do we get 1/8? It's 0.5, so currently it has an offset of 0.5. And we're going to change the thickness on the lower portion of the frame to 0.375. So if you take 0.5, subtract 0.375, you get 0.125, which is 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so let's go ahead and offset this trim with fillets, right? We're going to take it. And actually, I'm not going to do the one with the fillets. I'm going to hide that. I'm going to come back to our original trim with no fillets because I don't want to offset. I don't want to use the offset of the fillets. I actually want to keep the fillets the same radius of 1/8 of an inch. All right, so go back to trim, no fillets, and we're going to offset outward 1/8 of an inch to give us that 0.375. Okay, so let's go ahead and offset the purple. We're going to offset in the outward direction. Reverse. Okay, there it is. In the outward direction. And okay. Okay, there it is. We have our new trim, or actually our offset. Okay, so we did an offset. Let me just double check that it is 1/8. Nope, actually I have the wrong number. So 1/8, 1 divided by 8. Click away. It'll convert it to a decimal, 0.125, and OK. Okay, there we have it. All right, so let's hide the purple. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to do another trim. So we only need the bottom half to change the thickness from 1/2 inch down to 3/8 of an inch, 0.375. All right, so let's do another trim. Let's see if it allows us to, or we'll get an error message. So we're going to go trim. I want to trim the rectangle, keep this inside, and keep this portion, the bottom half. And it did create the trim. Notice it removes the areas it doesn't need. Okay, good. That's what we wanted. I wanted to also keep this portion of it. And hit OK. And there it is. Okay, so we're going to use some fillets. So let's say we're using I don't know, 1-inch end mill. So let's say we're using an end mill drill that has a diameter of 1 inch. So to accommodate that 1-inch drill, 1-inch diameter drill, I'm going to change these to, I'm going to create fillets with the radius of at least 1/2 inch. Half of 1-inch diameter is 1/2 inch radius. Okay, so we're going to go with 1/2 inch. Now the radius of the end mill is 1/2 inch radius. Typically you want to go a little higher because as the end mill is machining and it stops to make the turn, it's going to chatter, it's going to bounce off of the material and maybe leave a few dents on that radii. So typically you want to go higher, just keep that in mind. Maybe go 0.5 plus 1/16 or 0.5 plus 1/32 to force the drill to make a turn along an arc and not stop and then continue cutting. Okay, so keep that in mind. I'll just leave it at 1/2 inch, but typically you want to make it a little bit larger than the radius of the end mill. All right, so there we have a 1/2 inch radius, and we're going to keep the same fillet of 1/8. So the edge of the end mill will have a 1/8 inch radii or radius. So let's create another fillet. Edge fillet. Let's go with 0.125. And OK. Okay, so there we have it. Okay, so let's turn on our solid. Okay, so we're going to take that solid and chop it with our new surface. Okay, so let's right click, define the solid. Let's go to part design. And let's go ahead and split. Split with our new surface. And yes, we want it to split outward. And OK. And let's see what we get. See if I did have it pointing in the right direction. Let's hide the geoset. And there we have it. Okay, so I'm going to, once again, let's go over this one more time. We have a thickness on the upper portion of the frame at 1/2 inch. Same thing with the flanges. Flanges have a thickness of 1/2 inch. Typically they're not the same, one may be thicker than the other. But just to keep this exercise simple, kept it the same. And then on the bottom portion, you can see how it goes from a 1/2 inch web to 3/8, 0.375 inches. Same thing with web. So flange, web. So here it's 1/2 inch thick. Here is 0.375. And same thing with the other flange on the opposite side. It started off at 1/2 inch thickness and it went down to 3/8 of an inch, 0.375. And we have our fillets. So this was our 1/2 inch fillet, radius of 1/2 inch. Again, typically you want to go a little bit larger than the size of the end mill. And we have our 1/8 inch radii, just like we have here and here. Alright, so that's how you split a solid using surfaces. Hope you liked this video. See you in the next one, and I will eventually cover a video with sheet metal.